Because the clock in the hotel is 2 minutes.
Yeah, mine's too late.
So I was
right on
like,
time.
oh my God.
Got to go.
Yeah.
Heading right back down, or are you hanging around Orlando this weekend?
We have everybody here. Great.
Nice bookshelf of them at home right now.
There's Mario.
I try to wait till we get
Morning.
a couple months.
It's a performance.
I drove and I'm rushing right back. Yeah. Right. That's what
I missed my kids' Christmas ball, unfortunately.
Figure out.
Because, I'm here, yeah.
I live in the country, so we're always looking for something to start a fire with. So
Morning.
comes in handy.
Yeah, I don't live in the country, but I'm married to a fireman. You know,
He's always looking to put something out, isn't he?
No, he loves to read. That's
good.
That's interesting.
They introduced you to my brother last night.
Yeah. The elevator.
They're two of the three.
They're the pros.
Gearing up for the holidays.
They can tell you how to set one without getting caught.
The other lad. We never really lad it.
That's right. I moved to Miami in '93, and
So, he's burning the
I'm telling you, you know.
Wouldn't be surprised.
when they get out of the
Right?
They're like, oh, well, this
Could be the next one to run for something.
when they're new or whatever.
he's like, I'm done.
He's been announcing it for a while. But now, our neighborhood,
Good morning. How are you?
we haven't had that happen in a while.
Right, those are the last one.
More adapt. So that if nothing else, they'll say, is everything good?
I have not seen her.
If it's not.
Other than last night. A chance to eat breakfast?
You ready for Christmas?
I hate voting on an empty stomach.
We'll start. You got about a week.
5-minute warning, 2-minute warning.
Amazon Prime.
So for me, good morning, Swain. Yeah.
Could I get you to go ahead and start finding a seat, please?
It's always next year.
Boy.
There's Jolie. He's coming.
And there's us.
It's like a flag.
It's not being televised now.
Okay, thank you. We're going to call to order the meeting of the Florida Housing Finance Corporation of December 14th, 2018. With that, looks like we have everyone here and we have a quorum. So the first item of business is the approval of the minutes of September the 14th board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay, how about the approval of the minutes of the November 2nd telephonic board meeting that we had?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Thank you. All in favor?
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Before we get into the actual committee report, are there any changes to the action or consent agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have one item to be pulled, and that is sale consent item B. I believe that's correct, Kevin? Yes. I'm fortunate to report that loan has actually closed, so we are not in need of an extension there. So that's great news.
Yes.
That's the only agenda item I have received any word from. I don't know if any board members have any others.
Any board members? Okay.
Doesn't look like it.
Seeing none, we'll show sale item on the consent agenda be pulled. All right, audit committee update. Natasha?
Thank you. Good morning. The audit committee met yesterday. We started off by approving the meeting minutes of our July 26th meeting. And then the Office of Inspector General presented the audit committee with the finalized IT audit, our 2019 annual risk assessment overview, an update on the ongoing ethics audit, and a final review of the 2016 Auditor General Operational Audit Report. And that was it.
Okay. Do we need a motion on that?
No.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I appreciate the work the Audit Committee's been doing for the past year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're into a public comment. This is for any item that's on the agenda, but let me just clarify something. We're going to talk about, when you get down to item 9, Florida Housing Portfolio Preservation Plan, there will be a chance for comments on that specific item after we hear staff's presentation. So if you have a comment on that, it'd be better to wait till you hear the presentation before we get into it. With that, are there any other comments? I think we have mics over there and over there. All right. Seeing no one beating a path to the mic, we will move on. Fiscal item A, Barb.
Thankfully, Barb recently got her cast off, so she's not having this little scooter thing navigate through these tables. But
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Board. This morning you have before you the item to approve the proposed 2019 operating budget. The budget was, in its proposed form, was provided to you in November. I know I've spoken with most of you about any questions that you have, but certainly before you go through the approval process, if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Okay, questions for Barb? Seeing none, I'd just make a comment. I appreciate your work on this, and I appreciate you underrunning the budget. That doesn't necessarily mean you want to over forecast, but
I
good
get
job,
it.
and I know y'all will continue to do that in the coming years.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I thought there was going to be a presentation on the budget, but I guess we could just ask questions, or
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
That's fine.
okay. Just there's a staff salary increase, percentage increase, and that's what, 5%?
It is 5%.
Okay, and the state employees receive an increase this year under the approved budget.
My understanding is they did not.
Okay.
Selected perhaps professions did, but not overall.
Okay, so yeah, so the rank and file state employees did not receive a salary increase.
I believe that is the case.
Okay, so I would have an issue with us doing anything different than the state did budget-wise regarding staff salaries. So I would have to oppose that if staff wants to come back with a modified proposal, 1% increase, something like that. What is the justification for doing 5%? Has it been a while since our staff has not had an increase?
No, that is not the case. Thank you for the question. That is not the case in terms of our staff hasn't gotten a pay increase, but when you look at the market and you look at the professions that are similar to Florida Housing's, the pay increases are even less than what we're proposing in this budget. So 5% is certainly not out of the norm from the general market in terms of pay increases. And we do look at that before we make a recommendation to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Trey would like to comment also, Renee.
sure. Yes, that's correct. Rainier, we believe that the 5% built-in for salary increases, that does not guarantee that any or all employees at Florida Housing will receive a raise. The system that we have in place is we have our goals that we got to make for our employees. We have what seem like probably to most supervisors at Florida Housing endless meetings in regards to expectations, and those must be written up, and we'll be doing our evaluations here and establishing those here by the end of the year. And so, again, we, as Barb mentioned, we compete with the private sector accordingly. We are not state employees, and that's what we are asking for you all to approve today, and appreciate your consideration.
Trey, with regard to employee retention, can you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, I can, and I'll ask for an assist from Barb as well, and any other supervisors who may be able to comment. I'll tell you that, obviously with Florida unemployment being around 3.5%, it is not easy. It is somewhat difficult to get, experienced, great employees because we're competing with the private sector. I know that we lost one of our own, Brantley Henderson, this year to the private sector because we simply can't compete with some of the salaries and benefits that they're able to offer. And so that's part of the reason why we think that this is justified today. I don't know, Barb, if you have any other comments.
Well, just from the opposite side of that, in the sense of trying to hire people, we also have to look at where they're coming from right now, and we have had any number of people turn down positions at Florida Housing due to pay. Not because of benefits necessarily, but because of the pay. And I think the IT area has had some difficulty in attracting people. I know I myself have as well.
Well, I'll state that I support that you need to meet the market, and so I'll support the increase.
Ron? Yeah.
Yes, it's my understanding this is just a budgetary number, and you have a process to determine who gets increases and who doesn't, I assume.
That is correct, yes. As Trey explained, we go through the performance evaluation process, and there are expectations that employees need to achieve in order to be considered for a pay increase. So the pay increase number that you see in the budget is just that. It is just a number. And then we go through the entire the actual process, the formal process, in order to determine who will receive anything. And the other thing to remember is that it is just a number, because if Florida Housing, these pay increases are determined late in the year, and the reason they're determined late in the year is because Florida Housing has to make its revenue projections, and Florida Housing has to pay for these pay increases. So if things really tank during 2019 and there isn't revenue to support anything in the budget, actually, any line item, particular line item, but pay increases are discretionary. And so it would depend on how well Florida Housing is doing in order to be able to pay these.
Let me go ahead and make a comment, too. As a result of an issue a few years back, as board chair this last year, I did get to review the proposed salary increases for all the employees, which was the first increase in, 1 or 2 years, I think.
I know I think there have been pay increases pretty well previously along, yeah.
But so it's not strictly Florida Housing making the determination. I do get to review them, and certainly would welcome anybody on the board that would like to participate in that activity to do it. So it does have the oversight of the board also. Anyone else? Renee, any more?
No.
Questions?
I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
Trey and I have, we're looking at, the legislature's been looking at us a little bit more closely lately. We, as the board, and the previous executive director had issues prior to Trey taking the helm here. It's not Trey's fault. It's not current staff's fault. And I really don't have a problem with the 5% increase per se. It's just if the state employees didn't get an increase and they're going to be looking at us, the legislature's going to be looking at us, I just don't like the optics of us doing something that state employees aren't getting, or us doing something the legislature and the governor weren't able to do or couldn't do because of the economics for state employees. So I think we should follow suit with what the state government did. Okay. Even though we're not necessarily a governmental, we're a private entity, but yeah.
Understand. Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Did we ever do a motion?
I don't believe you did.
Did. Okay.
I don't know if we voted, though.
No, we have not voted. We have not voted. All right. If there's no more discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Motion.
Thank you.
Well, that's what I asked. Did we have a motion? And somebody said, yeah, we have not had a motion. I wasn't sure about that. Okay. All right,
move
so
it.
now let's start over again. Do I have
So
a
moved.
All right.
All right, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Now, let's take the vote again one more time. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Hey,
Okay.
trying to
All right,
confuse me,
thank
aren't you?
keep us
Not
straight
hard to
down
do.
there. I didn't think we'd made one, but somebody said we had, so. All right. Multifamily programs. Marissa, I believe you're going to take these, and David's going to be involved with number A, or letter A.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. So happy to see all of you here today. The first, we have 4 items for multifamily programs in terms of allocations, and the first one is the request for applications for home funding. So in 2017, the board authorized staff to proceed with the development of an RFA for home program funding in an amount to be determined at that time. And so we have an estimated $3 million in home program funding, our 2017 annual allocation, plus some program income available for this RFA. And as you know, multifamily allocations, we process the RFAs, we issue them, but for the home program, being that it's a federal program, it's administered through our homeownership program. So I have David up here to talk about why we're coming back to you on this agenda item with some exciting ideas of use for these funds. So I'll leave it to David to continue.
All right. Thank you, Marissa. Good morning, Board. So on July 28th, 2017, the Board authorized staff to proceed with development of an RFA for home program funding and an amount to be determined. As Marissa said, we have looked at all of the program income we're getting, plus the available home funds that we have been recently allocated by HUD, and there's an estimated $30 million that we are proposing to be available for this RFA. So staff would like to proceed with the development of this RFA and to not only target rental developments in rural areas as we have done in past years, but for this particular RFA also to give preference to those counties that were most impacted by Hurricane Michael. So the recommendation is to please authorize staff to proceed with the development of an RFA for home financing and authorize the executive director to establish a review committee for the RFA to make recommendations for award to the board.
Okay. Thank you. Now, do I hear a motion for this?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Now, any discussion or questions for staff?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Why did it take so long? Or is that a typo? July 2017?
Yes, that's when we were first given authority to do a home rural RFA.
Don't we put out home money every year?
We usually do, yes.
We didn't in 17?
We did not. And part of the reason was we began working with the Department of Economic Opportunity on their Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program, where funds are being made available to IRMA counties. And one of the RFAs that we're planning is for those counties that are mostly rural to have the CDBG-DR funds act a lot like home funds in those rural counties. So as we were working through that process, we did not want to put one source on top of another and have it, have too much out there at once that would then compete and not have enough applications to come in for the money. So we began putting it off until we had a better view of what that looked like. And then when Hurricane Michael hit, that sort of determined what direction we wanted to go.
Thank you.
With these home funds. Yes, thank you for the question.
Okay, additional questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second, correct? And
Ray, just my comment. I know we'll be working with Marissa and with David on whether or not those are going to be goals that we actually set, or simply incentives. I don't think we've worked through that exactly, and that'll be developed in the RFA. So I think we're still working through that. Isn't that right?
Correct, yes. I think we're going to workshop that, decide, if it's going to be all counties, that were individual assistance counties for Michael that are eligible, or some subset of those. But, we're going to be workshopping that with our stakeholders and making sure that we have enough interest in those areas to get the funds out. Now, of course, the Hurricane Michael impacted counties are designed to be first preference. If we don't get enough interest, then we would, at least as it stands now, before we're workshopping this, the thought is then those funds would become available statewide to anyone working in another rural area of the state.
And just as another comment to point out, we're pretty excited by this. Really appreciate working with David and Marissa on this on this idea to move towards those hurricane impacted counties, because this in my opinion will probably be the first real injection for permanent housing in the area, because CDBG, if it's actually approved, I was in Washington last week, even though it feels like a year ago, to talk to Congressman Dunn, who represents the area, Senator Rubio, and others. I'm not sure what's going to happen in Washington. It's looking more and more like there's going to be a shutdown. It was our hope that there would be some CDBG disaster relief money for Michael tacked on to this bill that would hopefully keep the government open. I'm not sure that's going to happen. And so we're very excited to be able to talk to, folks in the Panama City and Panhandle area, and hopefully get this money moving in a significant way next summer. I think that's our target date, is to start moving in the summer to fall.
Correct. We hope to be back to you, the board, with a recommendation for awards at the May board meeting.
I will make a comment that it's amazing how all of a sudden a lot of the elected officials in Bay County and Panama City are now a little more receptive to affordable housing than they were a few months ago. I've actually had them approaching me asking what can be done. So I think the time is right. The need has always been there, but I think it's been amplified now. So thank you. And just remember, there were 12 counties impacted, so there's a lot of counties out there to make sure we touch on it, hopefully.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion. We've had comment. We have a second.
Hey, Ray. One more thing. I just wanted to add on to that too. From a CDBG disaster recovery perspective, we are advocating for specific dollars for Hurricane Michael as well. The devastation over there is unreal, and so I think. But Trey is right. That funding because of the way that it is designed, it just doesn't come quickly enough to address issues. And so we are. So something like this will give that kind of. When that can occur within like the next year and a half, as opposed to a timeline of a couple of years when a lot of these other things come online. We're continuing at DEO to kind of push that envelope to try to get the CDBG disaster recovery funds allocated more quickly once the ball is in our court. And I would encourage really anybody to, if you have any ideas, anything that you've seen that worked in other areas that can help us, especially as we start to approach and look at potential funding for Michael, please reach out to me, and I'd love to hear those ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate everything you've been working on with that. So, all right. Any other comments? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Very good. Moving on. Item B.
Thank you. This is the RFA 2018-106, Financing to Build Smaller Permanent Supportive Housing Properties for Persons with Developmental Disabilities. On September 12th, Florida Housing issued RFA 2018-106, offering $3 million in grant funding to applicants proposing the development of small permanent supportive housing developments for persons with developmental disabilities. The deadline for the receipt of applications was October 25th, 2018. Florida Housing received 7 applications in response to this RFA, and our review committee independently evaluated and scored their assigned portions of the submitted applications. At the November 29th, 2018 Review Committee meeting, the individual committee members presented their scores, and the committee carried out the funding selection process in accordance with this RFA. The 2018-106 All Applications Chart, which you have in your materials as Exhibit A, lists the eligible and ineligible applications received. The eligible applications and the ineligible applications are listed in their assigned application number order. The Review Committee considered a motion to adopt the scoring results set out in Exhibit A, and then a motion to tentatively select the applications set out in Exhibit B for funding, and invite the applicants to receive a preliminary award letter and then enter credit underwriting. And those motions passed unanimously. As outlined in administrative rules, at the completion of all litigation approval by the Board of all recommended orders with regard to this RFA, Florida Housing will proceed to offer all applicants a preliminary award letter and then invitation to credit underwriting after that. We're making a recommendation today that you approve the committee's recommendations and adopt the scoring results of the 7 applications set out in Exhibit A and authorize the tentative selection of the 4 applications set out in Exhibit B for funding. There's an unallocated balance of $948,000 remaining, and as provided in Section 5 of the RFA, any remaining funding will be distributed as approved by the Board. If no notices of formal written protest are filed in accordance with statute, staff will proceed to issue the notice of funding awards. And if a notice of protest or formal written protest is filed, then after the completion of the litigation, the staff will present the recommended orders for board approval and then invite funding awards after that point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion? Natasha? Natasha's made a motion.
Second.
Barney seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Great. Next.
Thank you. Excuse me. Moving on to item C. This is RFA 2018-114, sale financing for the construction of workforce housing. And this is what we call our statewide workforce RFA informally. On October 8th, Florida Housing issued RFA 2018-114, offering almost $24 million in sale funding to applicants proposing workforce housing to serve primarily low-income persons. And the deadline for receipt of the application was November 8th. Florida Housing received 17 applications in response to this RFA. Each member of the review committee independently evaluated and scored their assigned portions of the submitted applications. And at the December 4th review committee meeting, the individual committee members presented their scores, and the committee carried out the funding selection process in accordance with this RFA. The 2018-114 all applications chart, which you have in your materials as Exhibit C, is the eligible and ineligible applications received. The eligible applications and the ineligible applications are listed in their assigned application number order. The review committee considered a motion to adopt the scoring results set forth in Exhibit C, and then a motion to tentatively select the application set out on Exhibit D for funding and invite those applicants to enter credit underwriting. And those motions passed unanimously. As outlined in our administrative rules, at the completion of all litigation and approval by the Board of all recommended orders, Florida Housing will offer all applicants within the funding range an invitation to enter credit underwriting. And so our recommendation today is for you to approve the committee's recommendations that the board adopt the scoring results of the 17 applications, that's your Exhibit C, and then authorize the tentative selection of the 4 applications set on an Exhibit D for funding. There's an unallocated balance of $434,000 remaining, and as provided in Section 5 of the RFA, any remaining funding will be distributed as approved by the board. And if no notice of protest or formal written protest is filed in accordance with statute, staff will proceed to issue an invitation to enter credit underwriting to the applications set forth in your exhibit. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve staff's recommendations.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions? Okay, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great.
Thank you. Okay, the last one. This is RFA 2018-115, sale financing for the construction of workforce housing for hurricane recovery in Monroe County. You'll remember in the last legislative session, we got a specific appropriation for $15 million to be specifically targeted in Monroe County, and so that's this RFA. On October 8th, we issued RFA 2018-115 and offering the $15 million in sale funding and $1.8 million of competitive housing credits funding to applicants proposing the development of workforce housing for hurricane recovery in Monroe County. The deadline for receipt of applications was November 8th. Florida Housing received 5 applications in response to this RFA, and each member of the review committee independently evaluated and scored their assigned portions of the submitted application. At the December 4th review committee meeting, the individual committee members presented their scores, and the committee carried out the funding selection process in accordance with this RFA. The 2018-115 all applications chart, which you have in your materials as Exhibit E, lists the eligible and ineligible applications. Eligible applications and ineligible applications are listed in their assigned application number order. The review committee considered a motion to adopt the scoring results set out on Exhibit E, and then a motion to tentatively select the applications set out on Exhibit F for funding and invite those applicants to enter credit underwriting. And those motions passed unanimously. The recommendation we have today is for you to approve the committee's recommendations that the board adopt the scoring results of the 5 applications that you have in Exhibit E, and then authorize the tentative selection of the 2 applications set on Exhibit F for funding. And there's an unallocated balance here of just over $10 million in workforce sale funding, and there's no unallocated balance of housing credits. And so as provided in the RFA, any remaining funding will be distributed as approved by the board. And I just want to make a side note here, because obviously that's a significant amount of sale workforce funding left over. When we developed this RFA, we used all of our small county allocation of tax credits to get this RFA off of the ground. And so we know that the need in these deals is to have those 9% credits in Monroe County. And so what we are going to do and recommend at this point is that we don't have any more housing credits, and we won't know what we have, or if we have sort of leftovers, so to speak, until after we go through the 9% cycle that's coming up now. And so what we'll likely be doing is coming back to you in the early spring and seeing what we project we have left over from that, and coming forward again to reissue this RFA as soon as possible to get the remaining $10 million in sale out and continue the funding in Monroe County for the hurricane relief. So I just did want to make a side note that we acknowledge there's a significant amount left over. If no notice of protest or formal written protest is filed in accordance with statute, we'll proceed to issue an invitation to credit underwriting for the applications here. And if there is a protest filed, we will, at the completion of litigation, come to you with the recommended orders for board approval prior to issuing invitations to credit underwriting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve staff's recommendation?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we have motion and a second. Any discussion or questions for staff?
I have a question. I mean, clearly the interest was there but there were 3 ineligible that didn't make it. Mm-hmm. Do you recall what made those 3 ineligible briefly?
Yes, 2 of them were failure to submit proper forms in accordance with the proper form, in accordance with the terms of the RFA. And you know, we take the language of our RFIs very seriously, which we must do in terms of how litigious the process is. And another application, I believe from recollection, did not complete the correct set-aside requirements in terms of affordability of units. So there was interest. We were able to fund 2, and we're excited about that, bringing that recommendation forward. But hopefully we'll be able to turn around in the spring and reissue.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I share Natasha's concern. Hopefully those 3 will get their act together for the next time.
Marissa?
Yes.
Is there an opportunity to provide some technical assistance to some of those folks to kind of talk about what was missed in the application?
We provide that opportunity after the funding cycle, and you know the cone of silence sort of closes. Yes. We can engage and talk about those any failures or concerns or questions they have about the process as well.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Okay, additional questions? Take my glasses off so I can see who's at the end of the tables. Nope. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, Marissa. Great job. Thank you. All right, professional services selection. You're up for this one?
Yep. Good morning.
Good morning.
This item regards a contract renewal for our website development and hosting services. Back in March 2016, the board authorized staff to enter into contract negotiations with SGS Technology, LLC, to provide website design, development, and hosting services. This contract expires at the end of next April and may, may be renewed once for an additional 3-year period. Staff supports the renewal of this contract to give us additional time to develop the skills that we need internally to take over the management of this website before the end of the contract term. So staff recommends the board authorize us to proceed with a 3-year renewal of this contract.
Okay, we have a recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have who is it down there that made the motion? Arnie? Tasha, second. All right. Any discussion on this item?
Yeah, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
go ahead, Renee.
What is the contract for? 3-year contract?
This is continuing development and hosting services for the website, and also training our people internally to be able to take over and manage the website once it's...
And the budget? What's the budget for that?
I'm not sure. I think I would have to ask David.
With the budget for the website extension and training?
$6,000 per year. It's
Okay.
very low.
Are we doing some new stuff with the website? Is it... Or
Always.
Always.
Yeah, it is a huge and very complicated website, and because of our commitment to transparency, there's just a lot out there that data that
Nobody has an uncle who can do this for less, or
yeah. Well, no. As someone who used to do this in a past life, it's a pretty massive effort, and it does take quite a while.
It's affordable. It's not.
Yeah, it's very
ridiculous
cheap.
amount. Thank you.
All right, great. Any other questions or comments? All right, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thanks, sir. All right, single-family bonds. Barb?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. This item is it's a request to authorize Florida Housing to go through the process for and to sell bonds in 2019. Just to give you a little background, Florida Housing sells bonds out of 2 master indentures, or we can, and both of those indentures are rated AAA. Florida Housing has approximately $333.8 million of tax-exempt bond volume cap for 2016 and 2017 combined, and we also have 2018's volume cap, and we're about to get 2019's volume cap. So that, just to put it into perspective, in terms of the amount that we're asking for, which is $450 million, we certainly have sufficient tax-exempt bond volume cap to cover that $450 million. We still use 3 means of kind of disposing of those loans that are originated in the program. We use the TBA market, and we use the specified pool market, and then we also use bonds. And in the financial markets that have occurred kind of later on in 2018, and we expect it to remain the same in 2019. Of course, who's going to predict what's exactly going to happen? It looks like bonds are a much better opportunity to actually dispose of those mortgage-backed securities and do the most benefit for those indentures and for the program. So we're looking forward to possibly using additional bonds in 2019 for that purpose. Also, just to give you a little more background, for example, in 2018 through November 19th, we have 2 products, the Ginnie Mae product and the Fannie Mae product, and we had $321 million of MBSs of Ginnie Mae, and we used bonds of $262.4 million and sold the $59.5 million in the specified pool market. For the Fannie Mae product of $736.7 million, the TBA market was $733.8 million and only $2.9 million in bonds. But if you actually looked at what's happening this is through November 19th, but the actual projections that we're looking at, or what we're seeing occur, is that bonds are ramping up The TBA is going down, and so we expect that bond allocation of those two products to be more bonds than TBA than it has been in the past. So the request is for $450 million, and that is projected. That is a projection of what we're expecting to see in 2019. We don't expect to sell the bonds until probably March or April. We have sufficient proceeds to take us through that, bond proceeds to take us through that point, but we do have the other markets in which we can sell these MBSs should the bonds, that we get rid of all of those bonds, and we haven't sold them yet. Markets are always unpredictable, so we're doing the best we can in order to determine the best time to sell, but it is based on production. It's not based on necessarily just the market. But we do have those three opportunities in order to, get rid of the mortgage-backed securities that are originated. Our production this year, while it hasn't been as robust as in 2017 because of the HHF that we had then, it still nevertheless is anywhere from 10 to 15 to as high as 17 million per week, and that's a pretty good rate for Florida housing. So as I said, staff will have to continue to look at the market to make a determination on when exactly to sell, but we need the authorization now in order to put all the parts together to get to and through the State Board of Administration, who has to authorize this sale, and then we can begin to look at production and see when we need to sell. But that's a numerous week-long process to get through the State Board of Administration. So we're asking for your authorization today in order to allow us to plan that far ahead. So staff recommends today that the board approve the necessary funding, staff actions, and the resolution to permit the issuance of the proposed 2019 Phase 1 homeowner mortgage revenue bonds.
Okay.
Moved.
All right, Natasha moved. Do I have a second? And Barney second. Discussion?
One quick
Yes,
item.
Ron.
In our discussions, I neglected to ask, you determine when you want to go to market, seeing how the market is reacting, and then determine. In other words, you'll do it in plenty of time when we need the funds.
Absolutely. And we do work, and I hadn't mentioned this, but we do work with a financial advisor who is, of course, much more tuned into the market than Florida Housing is. We rely on their help, but we also have the investment bankers who are guiding us with respect to what their ideas are on where the market is going. And yet the bottom line is we know we need to have some resource available to us in order to sell the mortgage-backed securities. So we look at all those parts and make a determination on when the right time to sell is.
Okay. Additional questions? Comments? Seeing none, we have a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
All right, now we're down to the Florida Housing Portfolio Preservation Plan. Let me make a couple of comments here first. What we'd like to do is we'll let staff do their presentation, and then any board questions or items, and that's not to say if in the middle of their presentation, if something strikes you, you've got to ask right then, you can ask it. But we'll have the staff comments, our presentation, board questions, comments. At that point, we will let the public, any comments you'd like to make. I just remind you when you come up to one of the mics, please state your name and what organization you're representing. And, then we'll have some additional comments or questions if there are from the board. And then hopefully we'll bring it to a vote. Let me make a comment kind of before we start. And, I was looking at the board members that are here today and trying to figure out how many were actually here in September of 2016, and it's not many. I think there's 3 of us that were in Destin when this first actually came to my attention and to some of the board's attention. this question about, the affordability and the preservation of units past the 30-year time frame. And, there were some concerns that were expressed at that meeting on both sides about whether it ought to be shortened, whether it ought to be extended past 50 years, what the issue ought to be. And then a lot of things happened at that point, none of which was the executive director left, and some other things took place. So there were some issues, and it kind of got put on the back burner. Well, early in 2018, we were contacted again concerning this issue. And not only that, but there was a bill put together and filed in the legislature that would have basically put the responsibility on Florida Housing to determine whether units were viable after 30 years as they came up. That bill never really got to a vote before the session ended. So, but that was kind of a wake-up call that, hey, we better be doing something, and no preconceived ideas as to what we needed to do other than to look at it. So in early March, we began some discussions to identify the extent of the issue. We looked at the severity. I mean, is this something that's right around the corner, something that's coming down? We looked at what other states, I say we collectively, I didn't, they did. Staff did all the work. Don't let me let you think I did anything. They did all the work on this. And we wanted to identify ways to ensure that we continue to provide and maintain affordable housing units. That's always been our drive behind this. It's not been to reduce the number of units. It's been to how do we provide and maintain a number. As you know, there's been a lot of hours, many, many hours put in by the staff over the course of this last year on this work. And I tell you, I think the staff has reached out to a lot of different clients on this, development community, the board, other members, and have put together a proposal we're going to hear about today in a little bit of detail. I think it's a good proposal. I think it's a proposal that we can build on and start with. Is it the ultimate proposal? No. If you ever find anything that you say, this is it, it's set in concrete, somebody's misleading you, because everything changes, time changes, facts change. So I think it's a good building block, and I think it'll evolve over time. That's if it gets passed. If it doesn't get passed, then so be it. We move on. But I want to thank Nancy, Laura, the rest of the staff. I know there's a lot of staff that I did not deal with on this that worked on it, and I certainly appreciate their work. So with that, Nancy and Laura, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Board. And I think I can speak for Laura and the staff in thanking you, Mr. Chairman, for your support and leadership and helping us think about this as we've moved through the process. So for us, the question has been, how do we keep properties in good conditions over the longer affordability period? Because that was really what was raised, in that initial discussion about 30 versus 50, that when you have restricted rents on a property, how do you get the income that's needed to be able to rehabilitate those units over time? And then the question to Florida Housing, how do we assist these properties when we don't have enough sale and 9% housing credits as it is, even to build the new units, much less preserve? So the plan before you, as the chairman said, begins to address this. It's a starting point, really. And it is, and I've heard from some in the stakeholder community that it's been important to them that Florida Housing staff has acknowledged that, yes, this is an issue, and we do understand that we need to preserve, or we need to assist in preserving properties past year 30, and potentially even before that in some cases. So this is a beginning. So just before, and we're not going to get into great detail on the plan. We've briefed many of you and have appreciated your time and your questions about this. But I just want to go over a couple of data points before we before we summarize the plan. In your, you may have the original item that was sent to you, but you also have an action supplement on your desk. In that supplement, you've got a couple of exhibits. So Exhibit B, on page, no page number, is just an updated, this is updated information that the Schimberg Center provided for us because we wanted, we had a sense of just some comments at the last in-person meeting in September that the housing need was changing, and we wanted to show you through this chart sort of an index process with the most updated census data we have. What this looks at is looking at both subsidized housing and rental housing in the private market. And this is the one that's got red numbers on it if you're looking around for it. Across these regions, does the supply balance with the need? And so numbers that are close to 100, maybe below 100 or a little over 100, that suggests there's pretty good balance for that income range. Numbers way below 100 mean that there are very few units for every 100 households. Numbers above suggest that folks up at those higher income levels are able to more easily find rental housing that is affordable to them out in the market. So you're probably not surprised because you're in this business, at least as being on this board, that in many of these regions we're seeing a need. Even in some cases up at the 80% AMI level, there's a few areas of the state in particular, but the need gets worse as you go down. And it's intuitive, but it's also important not to just base what we're thinking about or our policy approach on our intuition. So it's far harder if you're in the 0 to 30% AMI level to find a decent affordable home than it is if you're up even at 60% AMI and going up from there. So, and then just to give you a little bit more context, the next page, Exhibit C, this gives you a sense of the area median income, of the income levels of households living in just our 60% AMI units. So we took out the ELI units, we took out units that were above 60% and below 60%, just so that you could see who's living in, and this is family and elderly. Well, I guess we also have homeless and disabled, and of course, in those classically, you will tend to see lower income levels. So we also, in some properties, folks will bring a tenant-based voucher to help them pay their rent, or they'll live in a property with project-based rental assistance, which again allows them to pay a lower amount for their rent, or just at 30% of what they can afford. So you also can see here not just the total household median income, average income, but if folks don't have rent assistance. So what this means is, in sum, that folks who are not getting any rent assistance at all, in total, are paying less than 50, they are at income levels of less than 50% AMI. That's lower for elders, which is no surprise. And these are folks, especially in those family developments, these are folks who have no security net. They have to work, or they have to bring in income in some kind of way to afford those units. So these are working people. So just context for you as we go on. For your information. So moving back to the plan, which is Exhibit A, in your item, we've thought of this in sort of three sections. The first three strategies are sort of today action items, and are focused on doing assisting with recapitalization without adding precious, finite resources into the transaction, our 9%, our home, our sale. We went over in some detail with you at the September board meeting the first strategy, which we've set up, workshopped, and it is in place as a pilot right now to allow folks who have existing developments with sale to be able to refinance their first mortgage, to use those proceeds only for rehab rather than, as is currently required in the rule, to reduce the outstanding sale loan balance. So this will be good for properties, depending on the interest environment, et cetera. This will be good for properties, perhaps younger properties that have less rehab to do than a property that may be at 30 years. But it depends on really what that owner has done to that property over time as to when an owner might want to take advantage of this. So this is a tool that is now available. The second strategy is already available, and in fact, over the last 12 years, we have preserved more than 60 properties with over 7,500 units using this strategy to use 4% housing credits and bonds to recapitalize properties, and this is typically at or after 15 years of operation. There are some barriers in place that stakeholders were helpful in sitting down with us to talk about. Those are mainly, at least today, mainly focused around appraisal issues, and we are still working on those. So this is an area that we're committed to trying to figure out how to do this to make use of 4% bonds easier to do. This is perhaps the easiest way from our side to be able to help folks recapitalize. The newest strategy, I say new in terms of it being the sort of newest as in coming out the door, we haven't really done much with this, is number 3, the viability analysis strategy. And so option 1 of that is really would be allowed beyond any viability analysis. But right now, properties are required, if they're 9% or 4% properties, they are required to maintain their set-aside restrictions that they first committed to for a full federal 30-year period. After that period, what Florida Housing is saying here is that we are willing to allow those set-asides to be changed over to an income averaging approach, which can bring additional income into that property, and it may be just enough to be able to use a 4% bond transaction for recapitalization. Option 2 is, for us, I think in some ways, our newest sort of pilot here, which is, as we've talked about a little bit to you already, the concept of doing a viability analysis, if a developer is interested in doing that, to determine whether a property would be able to use existing affordable products in order to remain viable, to recapitalize and remain viable for the remainder of the restricted use period of 50 years. And if not, if the viability analysis shows they can't use existing affordable housing programs to recapitalize and stay viable over the 20 years, then Florida Housing would be able to amend the set-aside restrictions to include a portion of total units not to exceed 80%, so up to 80% of the units, depending on that analysis, could be increased to 80% of area median income, with 10% remaining at ELI levels or changing over to ELI levels, and another 10% at 60% AMI. And because we're thinking of this as a pilot, we want to learn from it. We're looking for this approach to be initially only available to family or elderly properties in the 9% portfolio, obviously that undertake recapitalization. The strategies 4, 5, and 6 are really conceptual going forward strategies. They're not to be implemented now. They would be items that once we get more experience under our belt with the first 3 strategies and probably some additional ones that start to build out of those as we learn, that we would then be more educated and experienced to be able to come back and talk about where should we use our limited finite resources for recapitalization, say using sale, using home, using 9% credits, but being very careful and targeted with those. And the final one of those strategies, number 6, which is on page 4 of Exhibit A, is the possibility in the future that you might choose to allow certain properties to exit the portfolio before their 50-year restriction was over, If we determine there is no way, there is no strategy to preserve that property, and we're concerned about the quality of the housing in the portfolio. So we're not recommending this at this point as much as we're putting it on the table for future board and staff to consider implementation as appropriate. The final portion of these strategies are the on page 4, the Florida Housing Infrastructure Strategies. We're calling them those sort of internal actions that we're in some part already implementing or beginning to implement in order to be able to do a good job of implementing those 6 strategies, and particularly the first 3 that I just outlined for you. I just want to make one more comment. On page 5, there's a D, develop parameters for prioritizing developments for recapitalization within each program strategy. In particular, if we're going to use 9% credits or sale or home in the future, we want to be really clear about which properties are important enough that we use those precious resources for. So we've developed a conceptual matrix which is follows this list, which is in your adoption, your consideration of adoption of this plan is not for us to implement right now, but is simply a tool for a future staff to begin sort of looking at, and if this is useful as a way to sort of target and bring down and figure out how to prioritize properties for that purpose. And with that, unless, Laura, you've got anything to add right now, I'll read the recommendation. Staff recommends that the board approve the portfolio preservation plan in Exhibit A and direct the staff to continue implementation of the strategies in the plan on the timeline outlined in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Do I have a motion on the proposal?
I'll move for purposes of discussion.
A second for discussion.
All right. We have a motion for purpose of discussion and a second. All right. Who wants to go first with a discussion?
You got more questions?
Yeah,
I have a question. Nancy, on the attachments, you have a list of properties by age.
Yes.
Is this our entire portfolio or just 9% credit deals?
I believe this is the entire, I think this is the entire housing credit portfolio. This is the longer version of that. Right, and I'm sorry I didn't mention this. We provided this to you at the September board meeting, and a couple of you asked about the age of the portfolio, so I re-included it for you. So yes, it's the housing credit portfolio, which includes 4 and 9%.
4 and 9, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. All right.
Okay. Barney?
Ray? Okay, I'm not going to be shy. You guys know me by now. I have 2 comments. One, there was something that I talked to Nancy and Laura about this. There was something that I was expecting to be in here, but did not appear in here. And that is something that I don't know that we need to add, but I'd just like to get on the record something that I think we should be chewing on for a while. Over the past many years, we've been spending 85% of our tax credits on new construction and 15% on preservation, but that 15% has been spent on preserving HUD properties with project-based rental assistance, and those units were not in our portfolio in the first place. So I think we should take a look at possibly at some point, I don't know when it should be, but maybe we should be preserving our own units with that 15% rather than the HUD units that HUD is not preserving. Second comment is in recommendation 3 on page 2 under option 2. This is the juicy recommendation. In the 4th sentence in option 2, what I'd like to do, I understand the concept here, but what I'd like to do is add a clause and change a verb. In the 4th sentence reads, if the analysis shows that the property is unable to remain viable for the remainder of the restricted use period, I would like to add a clause that says, and does affirm that increasing a portion of the units from 60% AMI to 80% AMI will preserve and recapitalize the property for the final 20 years of the affordability period, comma, Florida Housing will amend rather than may amend. So it's saying basically, if there's an issue and we can affirm that increasing the AMI for some portion of the units recapitalizes the properties, then Florida Housing will do this, not may do this. Those are my 2 comments.
Okay, thank you, Barney.
By the way, I agree with Barney on that preservation, and I know we spoke about it on the phone. I don't know the language or legality behind it, but I agree. As our portfolio ages, using that 15% to rehab our own. And obviously I support the will do this, not may.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Yeah.
One comment I would make about that 15% and the policy behind that over time, almost more than the housing itself, the housing's important to preserve those HUD and rural development properties. But what's really critical about those properties that we don't provide in our own portfolio is the rental assistance contracts. Those federal rental assistance contracts, which are expensive to maintain, and we have really no state funds that can come anywhere close to providing that kind of support, ensure that in particular our focus has been on the elder properties in the HUD portfolio and also rural development, although not exclusively, but almost, my bet is 80-85% of the deals we've done with that 15% in the last, certainly since Governor Scott has been in office, have been elder properties, is to ensure that those folks with extremely limited incomes who would not probably be able to afford to live in the properties we finance continue to have a place to live. So as you are thinking about the balance of our portfolio and all of that, I just wanted to remind you about that consideration.
Thank you, Nancy. And I agree, obviously, not to eliminate those. Maybe we could see the efficiency that we're using that 15% and how it's best maximized, maybe splitting it in the middle, 7.5 or 10%. How efficient is that 15% allocation being used for that program versus maybe a different scenario?
I have a few comments,
yes,
if I could go. First of all, again, thanks so much for all the hard work on this. I know you guys have done a tremendous amount of hours of work on this, and I appreciate you keeping us posted along the way. Just a couple of things. On the first option in Exhibit A, I just want to just state that I really would not like to see a limit. Here we just give an example of $5,000 to $10,000 per unit. But if the project meets covenants, to be able to capitalize to, it could be higher dollar per unit. That's what I'd like to see there. So that's the first comment there. And just to confirm, there's really no age hurdle here with regard to the properties, correct?
Correct.
Okay. On number 2, I just had a question, and you sort of touched on it in your presentation in terms of barriers. Are there any other challenges with this particular option that have been developers have run into in terms of rehab, other than the appraisal issue? And then on the appraisal issue, what exactly is the appraisal? Just not meeting appraisal, or?
No. So on some of them, the appraisal issue is using a market rate evaluation or evaluation rather than a restricted rent valuation. the probably using an as renovated valuation rather than a current, with the bucket list of CNA items deducted, the immediate needs. And the other thing that we've talked about are on deals where you can't buy it from yourself, but same parties often create another entity just to change the percentage of ownership. So when they sell a deal to the newly created entity, they're adding seller's notes, which helps bring more 4% equity into the deal. And the seller's notes in comparison to the appraised value sometimes creates an issue. So it's all still pretty much around appraisals.
Right, and I think the bottom line issue here is how to bring enough equity into the project in order to be able to do the level of rehab that is needed. And so I think there's a sort of a struggle on that, and we have begun internal conversations about how to sort of rethink the appraisal process, or not the process of appraisals, but the appraisal standards, I guess you could call it, around various types of preservation deals, because this is not the only example, but in the 4% bond we're seeing it in RAD deals, so it's a broad issue for preservation. This is sort of one example, and I think this is the main issue or barrier that we've been talked to about. So,
okay,
I'm assuming more will crop up over time, as they always do.
Sure.
Right. So it is up to us then, as it has been since we've been in business, to deal with those.
And have you had, like you said, roughly about 62 projects have gone through this. I mean, have there been more that have been in front of you that just haven't been able to go this route, or is pretty much everyone that's come to you on this option has really, gone through the process and succeeded?
So I'm not sure that we would know if they couldn't go that route, because as far as I understand, most developers are trying to figure out how to do the deal.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not going to work that way, we won't see it.
Okay.
So the development community can probably better speak to that.
Right, and they, now that we've been talking about this, what I'm hoping is that they will come to us as they're seeing more barriers. I think this plan sets into effect that we are committed to this process. So, I think we'll see more of that.
Okay, thanks.
And one of the questions you had for us, which I think is a really good one, and we were just really unable to put the time into looking at it. You were wondering kind of overall how much rehab you can get from a 4% bond transaction, and of course some of it's based on this appraisal stuff. But we're going to pull that information for you, and we'll give it to all of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So.
Then on option number 3, first I'll say I agree with Barney's insertion, so that was an excellent add there. Then secondly, I'm just trying to determine with certainty, because I haven't really been able to find out, and I've done some research on my own, but this option is at the 30-year mark. Of course, I would like as many options available, to preserve units as possible, available to the people who are going to do, the developers who are going to do the preservation. So my question is that, there's a compliance period of 15 years by the Fed. And so then my question that I want to kind of understand with certainty is, during the extended use period, the set-asides are federally required to stay the same. It's not in the state's hands, or the housing finance hands, to be able to make adjustments to that. Is that correct?
So our tax credit council has advised us, and I think it's an easy read of the plain language in the code, that the applicable fraction must be maintained throughout the entire extended use period. So the elections that are made, and the way we've written our EUAs, you have to maintain not just the federal minimums, and there's probably an argument that it's the state's way of writing the EUA, that during the extended use period you can change the ones that are above the federal minimums. But then if you go back into the code again, and I'm sorry to get into the weeds, but that's the only way I know to answer your question. When you go into the code again about what makes up a valid EUA for the property, the way that they're written, it incorporates that above the federal minimums because of the way we wrote it. And what we're doing going forward is to try and bifurcate those EUAs, and I don't know how far we are on the draft, but to keep the federal requirements and the state requirements somewhat separate, so it'll be easier to modify in the future.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So, it sounds like we're pretty well set on the 30-year as it's proposed. So I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Julie.
First, I'm really glad that we're having this discussion. I think especially when you look at the data that the staff has provided related to the aging out of properties, and you look at the need in the different AMI brackets, it really helps to kind of paint a really good picture of how this might be used or how we might tackle this as an issue. What I would say is I'm great with the first three. I think these are good strategies. On option 2, especially, and really with this plan overall, I think we've started a robust discussion about preservation, and I think this is kind of one of what I would suggest many discussions that we would need to have, and especially as it relates to 4, 5, and 6. I would suggest maybe taking this as almost a pilot that we could come back and have a set time period of when staff could come back and report back out on how these things are working. If there are new things that have been new considerations that need to be brought up because of the way they're being implemented, and both positive and challenges as well. I think that would be a really great way to kind of think about this going forward. So my recommendation would be to move forward on 1, 2, and 3, and I'm fine with any recommendations or changes that the other board members would like to make to that, but use it almost as a pilot and start a robust discussion around this, and take it kind of as an iterative approach.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. It's not the last we're going to see of this as we go forward, and we certainly need follow-up. Yes, Natasha.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry. Nancy, can you explain on option 2, you said this approach is available only for the family or elderly at 9% credit. Can you explain why we're limiting it to 9% credit? Just because, obviously a roof is a roof regardless of, the age of buildings doesn't really matter. So why the mechanics of only a 9%? The logic behind that, does it not work financially for others?
It's less about the mechanics, and it's more about a smaller group as a pilot.
So for pilot purposes?
Yes. I want to be clear, and we've indicated this to members of the development community who have asked about this, that we do not expect for this option to only, we expect to expand this.
Then I agree. In moving forward with a pilot program, can we maybe set milestones so that we don't let this linger? When was that meeting in Destin?
Yeah, September of 2016.
So some time has passed, so that we make sure that we reach those milestones, or so this stays as an active item to make those other inclusions moving forward.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Ron.
Yep. In my discussions with Nancy, I had mentioned that I was really interested in the most flexibility possible because in the past, when we looked at purchasing some rental properties, everything was so different. Each property was totally different from another, different levels of deferred maintenance. So the maximum flexibility, would certainly help in the preservation of affordable units. And I understand in our discussions that we have to start somewhere, and I guess this is probably a reasonable start. So I'll probably support this until maybe I hear from some developers that may change my mind. I don't know.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Was there someone that read?
Yes. Yes, I agree with Julie and Natasha's previous comments about taking a pilot approach and setting a time to perhaps reevaluate the effectiveness of the program. What I would like to ask Nancy is how long does she think is necessary to properly assess its success? A year, 6 months, what?
Well, based on the age of the stock, for this option 2, which has garnered the most interest, we're not going to get into analyses real quickly. I think 6 months we won't have much to say to you. I think that we shouldn't wait beyond a year to report back to you, but I still don't know how much we'll have to report. We will report back to you as often as you would like, and there are other problems to solve. For instance, we talked about the appraisal issue. So there are smaller things we could certainly potentially report back on. But in terms of really understanding how, sort of the biggest new thing here, which is option 2 and strategy 3, how that's going to work, that'll probably take a couple years, really to begin to have deals that are getting to that point where we're beginning to do the viability analyses. The great thing about doing this plan now, in some respects, is that from a year 30 point of view, is that we have a couple of properties that are at or above year 30 that have affordability restrictions that are higher than 80% AMI right now. And the ones that are sort of just coming are still, I think, maybe have 80% units, 80% AMI units, et cetera. So where we start to get into, getting into this is going to be a while. So it's great because we've set a stage, but we're also not immediately slammed with getting into these analyses. So it is up to you when you want to hear from us, and we'd be happy to report back.
Yeah, I would just like to establish a time certain to reevaluate at least some aspects of the program, and I think a year sounds reasonable. I don't know if my colleagues agree with me, but
considering that, I'd like to then insert in that 9%, not limit it to 9 and say 4 and 9, just because, what if that, and again, I don't know the breakout or if it would impact us, but what if that one unit that's, at 32 or the one at 30 or 29 are already at 4%, then those are the most critical, and I wouldn't want to limit it to or exclude that possibility of preserving that. So I'd like to, if everyone else agrees, amend it to be a 4 and a 9%.
May I ask, would you consider taking that a different route, because we did not look at all the bond regulations for that strategy, so I don't know what all is impacted off the top of my head. I would be concerned I'd forget something. But we could do it through petition for rule waiver even if it needed it. So, and that's available to people right now.
And I would add to that the quote-unquote simplicity of the current option in front of you does not deal with the fact that if we have sale in a property and we're going to take a big percentage of units outside of the affordable programs, the 60% AMI we'll have to change that to 50% AMI just because of the sales statute. So it's not that we can't do that, it's just that we wouldn't be able to live by these particular parameters that we set out here. So I'd have to think about some language for you all to adopt if you want to go in that direction today. But so we can either do sort of what Laura's talking about, or we could huddle, I guess. And
And each program brings its own set of regulations,
home
right?
program, yeah. So.
Nancy, in terms of the viability analysis, are there already set criteria under that analysis that you work by? Are you going to be developing these?
We're going to be developing them.
Okay.
Okay, Latasha, you had a...
Julia.
Julie?
One more thing to add to kind of the iteration in which we would revisit this. I might suggest something sooner than a year, maybe a 6 month or sooner. I see, especially on these things that are under the future consideration piece, really what I consider the future consideration piece, the 4, 5, and 6. I'd like to revisit these when they're a little bit more ripe for discussion. So that might be, I see the timeline on this one is to be developed after 2019, which is that after, does that mean in 2020, or does that mean after next month?
It means after 2019. It's broad.
Okay.
So the idea being that our notion was that let's get to know how we're going to use our more infinite, I should knock on wood because nothing's infinite.
I understand.
But our least finite resources, let's figure out how to be smart with those related to recapitalization before we start pulling in the most precious resources and having to divide up between new construction, the other preservation we're doing, et cetera.
I understand now. So before we move forward on 4, if we were to move this plan forward, before we move forward on 4, 5, or 6, that item would come back before the board.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. And I think if there are, I love that we would be able to look at this again after the data and analysis is available. But I understand that the restrictions on that, or just the lifetime or the occurrences that would have to happen in order to get something that we would be able to look at from a data perspective would take too long. So it may just be that as staff begins to look at this and really implement this and push it forward, there may be anecdotal information that we might be able to evaluate at that point in time to understand its effectiveness. And so I would propose for putting a target timeline for reporting back on this, I would suggest maybe something around 6 months.
Okay.
Is that a motion?
Well, it doesn't have to be a motion, it'll just be a board request.
Okay.
Come back to us within 6 months. Within 6 months with an update of what's transpired on any of this.
We commit to doing that.
Yeah, stuff, an update. Yes, well, wait a minute. Latasha?
Oh, no, I was
You said, oh, you're just trying to, okay,
Yeah.
Ron, go ahead.
I agree with you. Appraisal is going to be an issue. When you limit the income, it's going to be a problem. Do we have any ability or any programs that we can go over appraised value on anything? That may work. Probably not, but I'm just curious if there's a way, there's something we can work out if that becomes a problem.
Yeah, we're still working through that appraisal issue, so we'll take a look at it with that angle and see. But I think the housing credit program only says that you'll get an appraisal; it doesn't dictate it. But on the other side, the folks will criticize if you put too many credits in a deal, and the code prohibits putting too many credits in a deal. So there's nuances there that we're just trying to keep Florida housing from being harmed.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Is there anything that changes as far as Florida Housing's involvement or oversight with this plan on the actual making of the repairs on the properties for the preservation? Is there any kind of additional oversight or anything that changes from it, how it currently is structured?
So if if a development goes through and gets private financing rather than one of our programs or credits, we wouldn't have oversight. But with this, because it's completely outside, perhaps we could add the inspections like the 4% credits get, because we don't oversee that either. The money flows from other parties. But we could consider adding something like that so we could make sure that what's promised in the recap occurs.
Does that kind of segue into, on page 4, it talks about infrastructure strategies, and it goes into a little bit more robust, talking about dashboards and other things, but wouldn't that kind of tie into that as far as, if we're talking about a pilot program, wouldn't that be a benchmark to kind of understand what kind of involvement would be needed from Florida Housing, if any?
Yes.
And so would that also then tie into what we're all agreeing to with options 1, 2, 3?
Yes, Laura, so if 20% of the units remain in sort of under our affordable bailiwick, how is compliance monitoring done related to the rest of the 20 years over the whole property?
Even with the shift up to 80, we would monitor those units as well to make sure. But I believe the first question was the construction.
Right.
So, but these developments that go through that option 3, number 3, option 2, sorry, will still be in our portfolio for compliance monitoring. So they'll still get the annual reviews, and they'll get, tenant files will be reviewed, the physical items will be reviewed, reporting will still occur.
So to that degree,
normal
nothing
process.
changes for them on that.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead maybe and get some public comments now, and the board will still be able to ask questions after we hear something from the public. So again, if you'd like to comment on this, please come to the mic, state your name and the organization you represent. There you go.
Susan. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Susan Lay, Community Concepts Group. Just kind of a general question on, not a general comment on policy related to affordability. I think that, first of all, one of the concerns was about the 15% and how that should be done. That's not, you can change 15%. You can do more preservation. You can do more rehab. You can do more of that. That's a decision, a policy decision that you can make in terms of your split between new construction and preservation of existing deals. So don't let current rules or anything else stand in your way. If you decide that there's something that's a bigger priority, you can make that a priority. So don't limit yourself from that perception. In addition, policies in general, the board's role as a whole is usually to make policy decisions and decide what your priorities are. And those change based on the economic environment that you're experiencing, be it interest rates or something else. And, the larger discussion for the board is what's a priority, is dealing with storm victims and disaster and that sort of thing. Is that going to be the priority in the next year? And just because you make it a priority one year doesn't mean it has to be the next. So I think those are rolling things, and although staff make recommendations and give you ideas on what they think is a priority as a board, you can set different policy, different priorities, and then the rules and things can be changed, RFAs can be changed around that. So keep yourself open for that based on what's going on. You can't predict how interest rates are going to go. You can't predict the storms that are going to occur. You can't predict some of the things. You do know you have a portfolio. You do know that those things are coming down the line and some of those things need changing. But when you're trying to make decisions on that, that's something to keep in mind. Also, in terms of affordability and long-term and whether 30 years is too long or 50 years or we shouldn't be committed beyond 15, remember the amount of subsidy that are going into some of these transactions. When you're looking at cost of $300,000 a unit in some places for a rental unit, you should have some expectations on what you get back out of that. Nobody's forcing a developer to walk through the door and take this money. But once they take this money, there should be an exchange for something that you have determined to be a priority. And if that's serving a certain level, then you need to think about that. You don't want, developers should get their fees. Developers should make whatever they need to make, because you need to want them to come to you to implement your policy. You have the policy, you have the money, but you have to have private sector walk through the door to utilize that to be able to make that policy happen. But there's a line between them coming in and agreeing to do something and then getting an exchange for that something, but you overcompensating for that because in 15 years or 30 years they can sell that property because it's a good, well-located property and make millions of dollars off of it. So that's the balance that both staff and as a board that you end up having to balance, is that they agreed to do something, you know, in exchange for the subsidy that you provided to them, and long-term, you've got to look at that. But you also may have to make it economically feasible in the end, because you're not going to get them to walk through the door, you're not going to get them to agree to those things, and properties do need to be recapitalized. So pilot is a good idea because that way you can exchange. But I just wanted to put a couple of those things on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Natalie Maxwell. I'm an attorney with Florida Legal Services. I wanted to make some comments this morning on behalf of the Florida Housing Umbrella Group, which is a consortium of legal services advocates and law professors that advocate on behalf of low-income tenants. First of all, I want to thank the board and staff for the work that has been done on looking at preservation. It's something, obviously, as low-income housing advocates that we are particularly interested in. Many of the clients that we serve are extremely low income. And so I did want to raise some concerns about the third option that was presented in the preservation plan, the third proposal, particularly with option 2. And I will be providing written comments as well in more detail. But specifically, actually, on the first option, in terms of what the relationship with the viability analysis for both option 1 and option 2, we want to make sure that staff and board figure out a way to include tenant feedback on what's happening at the properties. I did not see that in the proposals, and I haven't heard that in the discussion. With regard to option 2, I understand it sounds like the idea is that the staff recommendation is to make sure that whatever the particular preservation strategy that's looked at is tailored to the property, which is completely appropriate. The concern is based on the data that is included on one of the exhibits regarding the impact and need for affordable housing, that the greatest need is at the 0 to 60% AMI level. And so that second option, with allowing the number of units to be based on 80% AMI, is going to it's going to make ELI units even less available than what we have now, and we don't need to decrease the supply of those units. The other comment that I wanted to offer is with regard to the priority matrix. So there was some discussion here this morning about the preservation of HUD and rural development properties. I would just echo the comments from the prior public commenter that what's currently in the qualified allocation plan, the 15% set aside, can be increased so that Florida Housing can both preserve its own units as well as those federally subsidized units. And the importance of those units is once those subsidies go away, they don't come back. It provides a deep subsidy that allows extremely low income working families to have housing, especially in our rural communities where there is a dearth of affordable housing options. And then the final comment that I want to make is just regarding the way that Florida Housing finds out about units that might be in need of preservation. I understand they have kind of the information about where properties are in the process, but it seems like there needs to be some further discussion and development about how staff finds out where these properties are that actually are in need of the different preservation strategies. And while The developers coming is obviously one way. This is another place where we think tenant feedback would be helpful in helping to prioritize those properties. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
May I ask you a question? In terms, excuse me, in terms of the tenant feedback, what kind of feedback do you have in mind?
So my understanding is currently, as part of the monitoring, Florida Housing already does some on-site reviews of files. That part of that process should include written feedback from tenants. So with the tenants that I've worked with, when the inspections are coming, they tend to get notices, a lot of notices about it, but they don't get any opportunity to actually speak with the inspectors or provide any feedback as part of that monitoring process.
So, excuse me, in terms of the tenant feedback regarding preservation, is the feedback that we should consider with regard to the actual rehab itself and how units are being rehabbed, or I'm a little confused at the tenant feedback there?
I think there are several opportunities for tenant feedback. So one, in terms of prioritizing what properties are going to be getting funding. So those places that are actually comply. So some property owners and managers are better at complying with their obligations. Others, also with regard to some of the policy, some of the way that they intend to implement any preservation strategies. So, for example, are they going to start non-renewing people's leases and move higher income tenants in, or are they actually going to be preserving the property so that they can continue to house the people who are there? Another way, in terms of the importance of the tenant feedback, would be in that viability analysis. So what we have been encouraging tenants that we work with now to do when they have issues with the properties they have is to contact the compliance manager for that property. I don't know how and to what extent that gets incorporated into that ongoing feedback to Florida Housing. But a lot of tenants, frankly, don't know that they live in a Florida Housing property. And so providing additional notice and information to tenants that are in those properties, that, in fact, the property has come to Florida Housing for preservation, to find out what type of management has been happening at the property prior to that would be helpful. Because when you talk about deferred maintenance, I think that's one of the issues that viability analysis would get into. And so the tenants are going to be the first line in some respects about what has or has not been happening at the property.
Thank you. Okay. Lauren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for a point of clarification, when our monitors are on site doing a review and they're doing the physical aspect inside a unit, they often ask the tenants if they have any issues, and that's where we find out how well they are, the management company is at turning the work orders and things of that nature. It's often that residents are very happy to talk to the monitors while they're on site. The other thing with respect to tenant protections is, if you direct us, there are national low-income housing advocates that advocate for lease addendums, for notice of rights and things of that nature. We could look into those things and report back to you and get the direction.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Shannon Nasworth with Ability Housing and also the Florida Supportive Housing Coalition. I just want to reiterate the thanks for all the thoughtfulness that has gone into this. It really is commendable and appreciated. I would just ask and encourage that as all viability analyses are being done, that as many units below 80% that can be preserved. As Susan said, we as developers agreed to do something when we accepted these resources, and we should try and all strive as much as possible to meet that need. I do greatly appreciate that ELI units are being added in option 2. I think that's wonderful. I do request that the Link Initiative be linked with those as well, so that we can get some more special needs and supportive housing units. I also want to reiterate that as this is rolling out, we make sure that it's done in such a way where no current tenants are being displaced when a property does become eligible for higher units, that eligibility only comes into effect when that tenant chooses to leave the property. This is someone's home, and we don't want to be displacing individuals and their families. The preservation of the HUD properties, I just want to express how important that is. We have so many individuals and families, and most of the people living in HUD-assisted properties are elders and persons with disabilities. Without those resources, they won't have a place to live, and our homelessness will become much worse. And it is a big investment, but it's a solid investment, because what the federal government is investing in those properties to make them affordable cannot be replaced if we don't maintain the quality of those properties. So lots of difficult decisions, and I totally agree, but please also remember people living in those units and the fact that we need to make sure they have a safe and stable place to live. And thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
My name is Mark Sween, and I'm with Dominium. And we very, very strongly support this plan. The work that Laura and Nancy have done on this is extensive, and they have really done a good job, we think, of identifying the breadth of the problem, coming up with a framework for going forward on how to handle preservation. And as background at Dominium, we have done a lot of preservation. We've been around a little over 45 years. We started out as a Section 8 developer back in the 70s, and today we still have properties that we developed in the 70s in our portfolio. So we've done a lot of it. And we are today we have a little over 30,000 affordable apartment homes in our portfolio. We're in 25 states. There's no state we work in that has a policy like this, that has given this much thought going into what to do about preservation. And Nancy talked earlier and said that there were 7,500 units of properties that have been preserved so far doing bonds. We have done 30% of those. And of those, on every one of them, not $1 of new 9% credits or soft subsidy monies went in. All of the money came from bonds and the as-of-right tax credits that come with bonds. And that we were able to do that. In doing that, we were able to do somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 per unit of rehab. And we have on our books 732 units of new preservations that we plan to do with bonds under the same sequence going forward. And the key to being able to do that is to have what I would characterize as basis-friendly preservation policy, so that the $9 billion a year that the affordable housing investor community is willing to invest in projects in Florida have valid tax credit basis. The appraisal issue is part of that. But I think that this program is really good, and the framework's really good, and we commend it.
Thank you, sir. Yes, go ahead.
Steve Moore with Vescor. I'll be very short. Really want to thank the staff and the board for taking on such a tough issue, which there's not an easy solution. As the chairman said, I think it's a great start. I want to thank Nancy and Laura for all the work they put in. They have normal jobs, and to take on something like this is a lot. And thank the board for taking it on. Thank the chairman for leading this. That's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Michael Hartman, Turnstone Development. I want to say first, thank you to the staff and to the board for everything you've done looking at this. I've been around pretty much since the beginning. I was involved as a CPA at Resnick from 88 to 93, and I've been a developer since 93, so I have a lot of properties I've developed are now in that where they're getting to 20, 25 years old, and no matter how well you keep them up, they do need rehab, so I'm glad that we're looking at this. I wanted to bring up just a couple of things, and my first comment I'm making, I am also the vice chair of the Brevard County Housing Finance Authority. We issue tax-exempt bonds at the local level. And I would just like to back up what Mark said from Dominium. He had a development with us, and this appraisal issue makes a big difference because on that particular development, they were doing over $3 million worth of rehab to a property that needed it in our jurisdiction. And right now, because there's a dispute about how the appraised value works for the acquisition, he took on, or Dominium took on, going into that deal at a potential loss where not only are they not going to make any money, but they're going to have to come over $600,000 out of pocket, depending upon what the ultimate outcome is. So I would ask that, and the issue is something that the tax attorneys who have decades of experience in this business have opined is an okay valuation. And so I would ask that we just, as soon as possible, work on that appraisal issue. It's very critical because, people are going to stop going into ACT rehabs because they won't be financially feasible. I mean, Mark has taken a chance. He might have to write a check, like I say, for $600,000 out of their company pocket. So, second thing I wanted to talk about real quick. I was the chairman of the Brevard County Housing Authority from 2009 to 2014, and something that Barney had brought up. My understanding from working with my staff over 5 years was that project-based vouchers came out of our total allocation of vouchers. So I would believe, and I would ask staff to check on this, but if a contract for vouchers goes away, project-based contract, the vouchers would not go away. They should go back to that housing authority that has jurisdiction over those vouchers, and then they could be reissued to other people. So to the comment that maybe we should be doing our own instead of HUD's, yes, the people who are in that particular property may not get that voucher anymore, but there are thousands of people on waiting lists at every housing authority in this state that would get those vouchers. I don't believe they would go away, and I would just ask staff to take a look at that and see. But that was my understanding when I was chairman of the Housing Authority.
Thank you, sir. And maybe staff could get back with him at a future time.
At a future time, sir.
Let you know that. Thank you. Oh, okay. I thought she was coming to the mic. Is there anyone else that would like to say anything? All right. Now, from the board perspective, after having some public comments, additional questions or comments from the board?
I had a comment. Susan brought up a great point in the beginning that I think would be helpful just from an open book management standpoint of, every year is totally different and setting goals are important. And I think just from a board perspective, and I'm sure everybody in this room would agree that whatever the goals are for this year, I think should be kind of agreed to or understood at least and posted so that we know, what is a priority or maybe something does need to change for this particular year. So I would be open to that, and I'm sure that's already existing within the organization, but maybe just being brought into that would be helpful.
Okay. Staff can work on that, Nancy.
In your spare time.
Mr. Chairman, well, really what's important about what you're saying is that moving in this direction requires some combination of opening up and looking at the qualified allocation plan, which governs the low-income housing tax credit program as we run it, as well as rulemaking. And we will be opening up the rule here in the spring, and we expect that parts of this probably have to go into the rule, as we've discussed at least in some parts. So, yes.
And I can tell you at the January of last year, this item was not my number one goal for this year. It became that in March. So they will change as time goes on. And yes, if you've got some input on some things, please let Trey know, and we'll see what we can
Well,
do.
I mean, I guess I'm more specifically speaking about the 85-15.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that kind of resonates with me. I mean, it's great to build new all the time, but eventually those resources can run out. I mean, there might be a time period where we get hit by 2 catastrophic storms where we might need to, ante up and do something different for a year. So I think those are things that should be discussed on an annual basis, and I echo that comment.
Sounds good. Thank you. Latasha?
Just want to acknowledge Shannon's concern and that I expressed it to Laura and Nancy, during our communication, that I would definitely like to see some language in terms of protection for the tenants that are in the units when the transition happens, so that we can secure that they are not displaced just because the units are now capable of being marketed for a higher percentage.
We can do some work on that and come back to you.
Yeah, that could be an addendum to the.
And it's probably something we'd want to
I
workshop.
think that's going to take legal involvement also on, how legal is it for us to do that? That's would have to be looked into, but yeah, I think there is a concern, but I also wouldn't think a developer wouldn't want a headline that says we've just thrown out 3 ELI families so that we can raise the rents. No, that wouldn't go over real big. But, okay, other comments? All right, seeing none.
So, Mr. Chair, I think we need to give you a new recommendation, and you can have a new motion. And
well, that's what I was going to get into is.
I see 2 amendments, as it were, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if Laura and Nancy would agree, or maybe 3. But I know Barney had a proposal to modify line 8 of option 2 to include and does affirm that Let's see, I can't read my own writing, but and does Barney may be able to reread.
Do you want me to state it?
I think we have it.
You have it?
We can add that. But what were the other 2 you had?
The other one I had was Natasha's add the 4%, which to the 9% availability.
Did we decide to do that, or it was
Well,
just a discussion?
I think Laura needed to get some language on it, so maybe with.
And we'll be back in 6 months with an update, and if you'd like action at that point, we can do that as well.
Maybe we could do, in the meantime, that with a rule waiver possibility.
Right. Okay.
So that if there is a current deal, yeah. Thank you.
So we've got the one Barney amendment. Anybody else?
Just a quick question.
Yes, Ron.
We're going to look at the 4% in 6 months. Is that what you said?
Yes, that's what we said.
Thank you.
And then my question about
Yes.
the
And we'll look into the language side of it if there's something that can
would
be
be
done.
before
The tenants.
Well, before we implement this proposal, I mean, not before we implement, let me take that back. As an addendum to this, if we can add it. But we've got to get the attorneys and everybody to make sure we can do that.
I envision that will take some research, likely a workshop, and then we come back to you.
Okay. And how long are you proposing for that?
4 to 6 months, realistically.
Yeah, to get everybody involved.
And I want to say that I say that not thinking that we're going to have gone through a viability analysis before then and be bringing something to you before that time. Because we've got to figure out the viability analysis, we've got to start working with the community on that. All of that's going to take time as well.
Yeah,
That brings up a good point. If you get one of these and it comes to you, it'll still come to the board.
Absolutely.
To ratify it. So this is just the procedure
Absolutely.
we're talking about, not that it's automatically going to happen.
Okay.
So that's a good point. Should have stated that. Yes.
I'd like you to.
Tasha, did you have something?
No.
All right, so we had a motion that was for discussion purposes, and it would be best to just cancel that. We've had the discussion. And so now, do I hear a motion to?
I'll give you a new recommendation if that's okay.
Yes.
So
One. You can
staff
give
is
me one.
proposing that the board approve the portfolio preservation plan in Exhibit A with the amendment to option 2 that includes the sentence, we're striking, you had the line number 8.
I think it's line 8 in option 2.
And it will now read, if the analysis shows that the property is unable to remain viable for the remainder of the restricted use period, but does affirm that increasing a portion of the units from 60% of AMI to 80% of AMI will preserve and recapitalize the property for the final 20 years of the affordability period, Florida Housing will amend the set-aside restrictions to include a portion of total units not to exceed 80%, to increase to 80% of AMI as required by the needs identified in the analysis. And we ask that you direct staff to continue implementation of the strategies in the plan on the timeline outlined in the plan.
Okay.
I make a motion what Laura said.
Okay, Ron made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Third, fourth. Everybody's anxious. Let's let Barney have this second as a farewell shot. Okay, we have motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Board. All right, moving on, and thank you again, staff. Great job. Now we're into the consent agenda. If you remember at the first of the meeting, we removed consent under sale. Consent B was removed because they don't need the extension. It's a great thing. All right, with that, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda minus consent sale, consent B?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, now, public comment.
Any other public comment?
Whoop. Let's see.
John Wilson.
Yes, sir.
Sean Wilson, Blue Sky Communities. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to extend, I'm the vice chair of the Coalition of Affordable Housing Providers, and I wanted to extend on behalf of the board and the rest of the coalition season's greetings. And I wanted to thank you for your volunteer efforts and urge you and everybody in the room and everybody in CAP to always keep in mind the ultimate goal, which is to provide a path forward for the hardest working families in Florida and for those who used to be the hardest working folks, the seniors. And I do want the board to know that most of the CAP members are very involved in charities in our own hometowns, especially around this time of year. We really make an effort to give back, and so we appreciate the fact that you're volunteering as well. So thank you very much, and have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for what your organization does. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Del Maria Licea. I'm with Florida Legal Services. I just wanted to bring something to the attention of the board, since we've talked a lot about preserving affordable housing today, and I know how important that is to you. Just an issue that we're having in Bay County after Hurricane Michael. Unfortunately, some of the properties that receive tax credits from this organization are wrongfully evicting tenants at this time. We've heard in one particular property, which is Andrews Place, that is claiming that they're evicting tenants because the property is uninhabitable. First of all, I would like to let you know that I just went to the property myself this week to see it with my own eyes. I'm not sure if the board has had an opportunity to go to Bay County, but as Julie said, the devastation is truly incredible. So it's very important that we obviously keep any affordable housing that's there, since there's been such destruction of the stock that we had in the first place. So one thing that I would like to ask of the board is that perhaps they consider how these units report on their habitability, because at this time we understand that it's pretty much their word that is being taken. As I said, I went to this particular property myself, and it looked, compared to other units, it looked like a resort compared to the rest of Bay County. The property looked great. Maybe there was 2-3 units that had habitability issues, but we believe that the properties are using the disaster as an excuse to displace tenants. Another part of the issue is that because of misinformation, after the hurricane, a lot of the tenants displaced, and a lot of them, these people, some of them are Section 8 voucher holders that are in these properties, and a lot of them have the potential of losing their vouchers. Because of the low affordable housing stock, you can imagine how important it is for these people to be able to find a place to live. And this particular place, Andrews Place, it's a pretty nice place. It has a pool, it has a computer center. So we want to make sure that we preserve those type of properties as affordable housing. So I wanted to bring to the board the attention of how important it is to make sure that these properties are being looked at from another level, not just self-monitoring, but to make sure that they are, in fact, uninhabitable, and that it's not just being used as an excuse to displace affordable housing tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. question for staff. Did we get any kind of report from the Panhandle as far as how many units were damaged, how many were considered uninhabitable, and all that?
Yes, we survey all of our units that were in the Hurricane Michael impacted areas. I didn't bring it with me today, but with respect to Andrews Place, and I'm sure Creston can speak to this very well, when the management company walked the units, they thought that they were very lucky. As they came in and started looking with the insurance adjuster and engineers, they found they had further damage with respect to water intrusion. So the initial communication for both phases of Andrews Place were that you could return to the units. After further inspection, they found, no, we need to do rehab. They have received their first insurance check already. They're moving rather swiftly on this. And I got an email from them Wednesday, and I want to say it's a lengthy restoration process. It's sometime next year, but that's not helpful because next year is not very far away, right? But Creston, I don't know if you want to talk to the other members of the board of how this water intrusion, you don't know it right away until stuff starts growing.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, actually, you don't need to talk to me about it because my house looks perfect from the outside, but I've got about 4 rooms that are gutted, and I can't even live in them. So, but I am allowed to live in the other half of the house, so it works. But I mean, I think you bring up a good point. We need to be very cognizant of what's happening with these units, and that people aren't taking advantage of the situation to do what you have suggested.
When tax credits are present for owners to avoid recapture due to this disaster, we're involved with that process as well.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, we happen to be working on an update for the Senate right now on a series of things that we're doing related to disaster recovery for Hurricane Michael, and that includes we're working on an update of damaged units over in that area. When we send that out Monday or Tuesday, I'll make sure that you all get a copy of that. And I think we have a presentation we're doing
Inauguration Day.
Right. To Senate Community Affairs about some of these kinds of things that we've just been talking about in our efforts in that regard, short-term and long-term. So we'll get that to you all next week just for your information.
And Creston, I didn't want to cut you off, but after the board meeting, if anybody would like to get with Creston to discuss this water mitigation business, please do so. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Natalie Maxwell, Florida Legal Services again. I just wanted to offer a point of information to the board regarding rental assistance provided by the federal government, that there are 2 different types, project-based versus tenant-based. And so when we talk about housing assistance that might be lost forever, we're talking about those project-based rental assistance contracts. They do not belong to the housing authority. They are issued from the federal government to the private owner. And so if those contracts go away, they don't come back. And that's different than the tenant-based vouchers that are common in our tax credit properties.
Thank you. All right, seeing no one else, we've got an election to take place, I think, and then we got a special matter that's not on the agenda. Trey, you going to handle the election? Probably inappropriate.
Actually, Natasha, I think.
Natasha? Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to propose that we nominate Ray for chair again and Ron for vice chair.
I can't second.
Have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other nominations?
Is this year 2 of your 4-year
No, this is year 2 of my final year. As the page says, 2 of 2.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd like to nominate Barney Smith.
Barney Smith?
No.
Okay.
Withdraw my nomination.
If there are no other nominations, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Be one of many in 2019, I'm sure. Okay, now, Trey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members, for your work today. And, your work over 2018. I think it's been a very productive year. I appreciate all of the hard work that staff, specifically Nancy and Laura Cox, have put into the preservation plan that we approved earlier today. We want to make sure we acknowledge all their and their staff and their hard work in that. A little bit of an update from the executive director's chair. Obviously, we have a new governor coming in on January 8th, and look forward to hearing and working with the DeSantis team. Technically, we have not heard much from the DeSantis transition team. I anticipate that will happen over the next several weeks, and look forward to working with them. I believe we fall under, in addition to falling under the obvious transition team led by the governor-elect, Lieutenant Governor-elect, and others. Former Speaker Will Weatherford and his economic committee will also be, we're kind of fall into that silo, and we'll be working with former Speaker Weatherford and his staff moving ahead, and I look forward to working with the Speaker again on that level. So that everybody is aware, one of the reasons why we had the election for chair and vice chair as we did is because there could potentially be significant turnover on the board, as most, if not all of you, are already well aware. I know I'm about to present Barney Smith, who has graciously served the board for 8 years, and we'll talk about him in just a moment. But want to make sure that everybody is aware that the three for sure members of the board will be Ron and the chairman and Latasha. Everyone else has the potential to be on the board or to be not necessarily reappointed by the new governor. So we look forward to working with the transition team, and we're working with the new board in 2019, which may be significantly different. However, on that note, we thank Barney Smith. I want to make sure that that he's properly recognized. This will be his last meeting. It took a little bit. For him to even get to this meeting, including a hurricane canceling the last meeting. But Mr. Chairman, we want to present him with this plaque for his service at Florida Housing Finance Corporation's Board of Directors since June 8th of 2011. I'll read it first. On behalf of the Board of Directors and staff of the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, we recognize and honor Barney for his years of public service, leadership, and perfect attendance on Florida Housing's Board of Directors. Perfect attendance. His passion and dedication to increasing affordable housing opportunities for residents that help make Florida communities great places in which to live, work, and do business. His career-long work to help shape affordable housing policies nationally, as well as here and in Florida. His steady guidance through turbulent times and the heart and wisdom that he brought to his oversight of Florida housing. Barney, your commitment to public service have left an unforgettable mark on the corporation, and we thank you, and I thank you. Thank you.
Barney, I want to thank you for setting the goal so high on the shortest meetings. I doubt seriously I'll ever beat your goals.
You could try. Thank you, everyone. It's been an honor to serve, and I've enjoyed it. Thank you. I would say more, but I would get choked up. I even brought Kleenex, but I'm not going to use them.
Well, thank you again, Barney, for all your years of service. It's been a true pleasure working with you on the board. All right. With that, any other?
Yep. So we have one more announcement, Mr. Chairman, so everyone is aware. The next board meeting will be Friday, February 1st, 2019 in Tallahassee. In fact, you can mark your calendars. The first 3 meetings of 2019, looking at Sheila, are in Tallahassee. So you can expect to come to our state capitol basically the first half of the year. So we look forward to seeing you all there.
Will they be at City Hall or okay?
Unless we get kicked out, which rarely happens.
Latasha.
So in that same area, I have a question. One of our dates is October 31st.
Yes. Yes.
It's
So
a Thursday.
Yes. So the October 31st date is a little bit of a change. That it will be a Thursday meeting, and I don't know that the place has been selected. Is that going to be Tallahassee? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that will be a Tallahassee one as well, and that was in deference to folks. Board members and others who will have to travel, and I know that having young children myself, that have young children and Halloween, you wouldn't be if you come the night before. If we were to do it on the Friday the 1st, that would be difficult for folks with kids. So that's in deference to the board members.
Okay. And we'll probably never invite you back to the Panhandle, Panama City at least. She's actually looking. The only criteria was outside of hurricane season. That's the only criteria. So. All right, if there's anything else, seeing nothing from the board, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Now, on the bigger.